Okay, so let's unpack this. If you've spent any time at all around modern product development, you've definitely heard the terms agile, scrum, sprints.
Oh, absolutely. They're everywhere.
But for so many organizations, those words just represent a frantic, 2-week dash where teams just grab a pile of tickets and hope for the best.
And that's not agility. That's just chaos with a deadline.
It's just glorified project management. It's true. And the difference between teams that really succeed and those that are just sort of surviving often boils down to how they approach the very first meeting of that cycle.
It really does.
Today, we are going deeper. We're getting into the structural integrity of the whole process. We're looking at the core mechanism that drives focused, valuable product delivery in Scrum.
We're talking about sprint planning.
Sprint planning and its singular, really powerful objective, which acts as the compass for the entire team, the sprint goal.
For anyone trying to implement the principles of the 2020 Scrum Guide effectively, this is the masterclass. We have to move beyond viewing sprint planning as just another mandatory meeting on the calendar.
Right.
And recognize it for what it is. It's a crucial collaborative launch pad where intent is actually defined and commitment is established.
So our mission today is to cut through all the noise you might have heard about planning. We want you to understand not just the mechanics of the event, but why the resulting sprint goal acts as that vital anchor that guides an entire team for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. If you want to know how great Scrum teams maintain their focus, how they adapt to complexity and still deliver predictable value, stick with us. This isn't about just scheduling tasks.
No, it's about strategically defining focused value.
Yeah.
When you execute sprint planning well, it provides the shield the development team needs to actually focus.
A shield, I like that.
But when you do it poorly, it dooms the team to 2 weeks of fractured priorities and just scope chaos. It's where your entire sprint success is truly decided, right at the beginning.
So let's start with the hard definition then. The 2020 Scrum Guide is really specific about what sprint planning is supposed to accomplish. What is it, formally speaking? And why does the methodology require this specific dedicated event?
Okay, so formally, sprint planning is the event that initiates the sprint. Its singular purpose is to lay out the work to be performed for that time period.
Simple enough.
But the critical insight here, the one that a lot of teams miss, is that the resulting plan is not dictated from above. It absolutely must be created through collaboration by the entire Scrum team.
That collaborative aspect, that's the first key takeaway we really need to hammer home, isn't it?
It is.
It's not the product owner, the PO, simply handing down a rigid mandate. It's the PO, the developers, and the Scrum Master all coming together to negotiate and define a realistic path forward.
Exactly.
So why is it so crucial that the developers, the people actually building the product, are the ones involved in creating the plan?
Well, it comes down to 2 things.
Yeah.
Accountability and realism. If the plan is just handed to them, they own the work, sure, but they don't own the forecast.
I see.
When the developers actively participate in selecting the work and planning out the how, they take full ownership. And crucially, what results from that is a forecast based on their professional judgment and the complexity of the work.
A forecast, not a contract.
It is not a rigid contract.
Yay.
It's the best prediction we can make right now. We're acknowledging that we operate in a complex environment where new information is going to pop up every single day.
I love that distinction. A forecast, not a contract. It immediately gives the team the license to adapt.
Absolutely. The moment you treat it as a detailed, rigid Gantt chart, you've just sacrificed all of your agility right there.
And the constraint that forces that crucial collaborative focus is the time box. Timing is everything here, and it is a strict boundary in Scrum.
It is the great equalizer. Sprint planning happens once per sprint, right at the very start. And the maximum time limit is 8 hours for a 1-month sprint. This constraint is a very deliberate design choice.
Okay, wait. 8 hours sounds terrifyingly long if a team is highly effective and well prepared. What are teams spending that much time on if they're doing it right? Or does the constraint just exist to make sure they don't spend longer than that?
It's mostly the second one. It primarily exists as a hard limit to protect the team's time, but it also recognizes that for really complex problems, you need significant discussion.
Okay.
But if your sprint is only 2 weeks long, your planning should realistically be capped at, say, 2 to 4 hours, like the source material suggests.
Right.
If a team is spending 8 hours planning a 2-week sprint, that's often a huge red flag that they didn't do the prep work beforehand.
Yeah.
They're using planning time for refinement, which is a major anti-pattern we're going to talk about later.
So the time box forces the team to come prepared, Define the goal quickly and just focus on the essentials of the plan. That perfectly sets up the who and the why behind their attendance. We have 3 mandatory roles in the Scrum team, and they each bring a vital, distinct piece to the puzzle.
Yes. The core attendees are the Scrum team itself,
Yeah.
the product owner, the developers, and the Scrum Master. The roles are non-negotiable, and their accountabilities during planning are very distinct.
Okay, let's break them down. The product owner.
The product owner is the one who brings clarity on value. They are the voice of the customer in the market. Their job in planning is to bring the most important product backlog items, the PBIs, to the table and articulate the potential value of this sprint.
So the PO is saying, here's the mountain we need to climb, but they don't have to define the exact path up the mountain. That path falls to the developers.
Exactly. The developers are the ones with their feet on the ground, the experts in the technical domain. They are the only ones who can realistically forecast what can be delivered. They understand the complexity, they estimate the effort involved, and they commit to that technical forecast. Their expertise is absolutely non-negotiable if you want a plan that isn't just pure fantasy.
And the third essential role, the Scrum Master. What are they doing?
The Scrum Master facilitates the event. Their primary job is to ensure the team sticks to Scrum theory and the rules of the game. They police the time box, they make sure the 3 key topics we're about to discuss get covered, and they step in to resolve confusion or internal disagreements over the process.
They're the guardian of the event's effectiveness.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, the sources mention that subject matter experts or other stakeholders might be invited. This seems to cause a lot of confusion. Why would we invite someone who isn't part of the core Scrum team, and what boundaries have to be maintained there?
They are purely consultants. That's the key. They might be invited for a brief period to provide some advice, maybe on a new regulatory change that impacts the definition of done or a complex architecture decision. But it is so critical to stress they are not mandatory roles, and they cannot be allowed to hijack the planning process. The final decisions on scope and how the work gets done belong solely to the Scrum team.
So if your stakeholder starts telling the developers how to write the code,
The Scrum Master needs to step in immediately.
that brings us to the necessary ingredients, the essential inputs for this collaborative launchpad. If you show up to sprint planning without these pieces ready, you are guaranteeing those 2 to 8 hours will be completely wasted. What has to be prepared before planning begins?
You need 5 critical inputs, starting with the foundation, the overall product goal, and the current product backlog, which absolutely must be ordered by value. If the PO hasn't continuously refined and ordered the product backlog, the planning meeting immediately collapses into just a chaotic refinement session.
Yeah, that refinement, or grooming, as some people call it, is essential. You can't just pull in a story that's going to take 6 months of work and expect to plan it effectively in an hour.
Precisely. The highest priority items have to be small enough and clearly understood. Secondly, we need an honest assessment of the team's capacity. This is where realism hits the road.
Okay.
It means calculating the actual working hours available, factoring in planned holidays, mandatory training, and even expected maintenance or support work that, historically takes up a certain percentage of the team's time.
This capacity calculation is often where teams fail, I think. They fall into that trap of hero culture, just assuming everyone is 100% available, 100% focused for the whole time box.
It's the primary way teams overcommit. If Jane is on vacation for 3 days, and we know our support load typically eats up 15% of everyone's time, we have to account for that reduction.
Makes sense.
The third input is tied to this realism, historical velocity or throughput. If the team tracks it, their past performance serves as a grounding reference. If your team historically delivers, say, 35 story points, forecasting 70 points for no apparent reason is an immediate red flag.
So velocity is a mirror showing what you have done, not a whip dictating what you must do.
That is the perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And finally, 2 non-negotiables that define quality and boundaries. The definition of done, or DOD, and any external constraints.
Right. The DOD is critical because it tells the team what done truly means. All the required testing, documentation, compliance steps, it all has to be baked in. If the DOD isn't clear, the forecast is meaningless.
And external constraints, like a non-negotiable regulatory deadline or a partner API that is launching on a specific date, Those have to be known inputs so the team can factor them into their plan.
So when all these inputs are ready, sprint planning shifts from a chaotic mess into a highly structured decision-making process.
And the 2020 Scrum Guide formalized that structure beautifully around 3 core questions, which keeps the discussion focused on value before it descends into just a list of tasks.
Okay, let's talk about that structure.
The structure provided by the Scrum Guide it's really an elegant framework. It's designed to prevent teams from immediately drowning in the how. It organizes the entire event around a sequence: why, what, and how.
And sticking to that order is essential.
It is absolutely essential.
Okay, let's dive into the sequence. This is the crucial moment where the team establishes a unified mission. The first and most important question is topic 1. Why is this sprint valuable?
This is the moment for strategic alignment. The product owner steps forward. They're looking at the overall product goal, that long-term vision, and they propose the most logical, valuable step forward that can be achieved in this short time box. They're defining the purpose of the next 2 weeks.
What happens if the PO has, I don't know, 2 or 3 equally valuable options?
Wow.
How does the team negotiate down to a single objective?
Well, that's where the collaboration comes in. The PO presents the options, they outline the value proposition for each one. The developers then weigh in with the technical feasibility and the risk involved.
So the conversation shifts.
Right. It shifts from what's the best idea to what is the most strategically important, achievable thing we can deliver that maximizes the value for our stakeholders.
And the outcome of that collaboration is the singular objective, the sprint goal.
Precisely. The sprint goal has to communicate the value, and the key rule is this: it must be finalized, agreed upon, and written down before the planning event concludes.
So if you leave the meeting without a defined, agreed-upon sprint goal,
The planning event has fundamentally failed in its primary objective. The team has no coherent purpose.
okay. So once that purpose, the why, is established, we move to topic 2. What can be done in this sprint? This is where the authority shifts from the PO over to the developers.
This is critical for self-management. The developers now own the forecast. Knowing the sprint goal, the target, they examine the ordered product backlog, they review their calculated capacity, and they select the specific product backlog items, the PBIs, that they forecast they can complete.
And they're only selecting items that collectively support achieving that sprint goal.
That's the filter.
So the developers don't just mechanically pull in the top 10 tickets the PO wants. They actively filter that list based on the new sprint goal, their capacity, and their estimation of the complexity. That selection is a pretty profound act of self-management, isn't it?
It is. It is the moment accountability lands squarely with the team. That set of selected PBIs immediately forms the core of the sprint backlog. This empowerment ensures that the people doing the work are making the realistic commitment.
So if they don't believe they can hit the forecast, this is where they push back.
This is the time to do it.
And this brings us back to that crucial detail: the forecast versus the guarantee. If the developers selected, say, 15 PBIs, are they locked into delivering all 15?
Absolutely not. The selection is the team's best professional guess. This distinction is really the bedrock of agility. The source material emphasizes that the exact scope, the specific PBIs, can be negotiated and adapted during the sprint.
Wait, hold on. If the scope can change, what holds the sprint together? What's the anchor?
The sprint goal. The sprint goal is the anchor that must remain intact. If, say, 3 days into the sprint, the developers realize PBI number 7 is way more complex than they anticipated.
Right.
They can negotiate with the product owner to maybe swap it for a lower priority PBI that still serves the goal, or even cut PBI 7 entirely rather than sacrificing the overall sprint goal. This flexibility is what makes Scrum so resilient in complex environments.
That makes perfect sense. The goal provides the stability, while the scope, the path, can flex. So once they know what they're pulling in, they move to the final question, topic 3. How will the chosen work get done? This is purely about execution strategy.
And again, this is squarely on the shoulders of the developers. They plan the actual steps needed to turn those selected PBIs into a done increment. This involves taking those larger PBIs and breaking them down into smaller, actionable work items or technical tasks.
Okay, this is where teams often run into that anti-pattern of over-detailed planning. Do they really need to detail every single task for the whole 2 or 4 week sprint right here in this meeting?
Absolutely not. And this is a key differentiator between rigid planning and agile forecasting. They only need to detail the tasks enough for the first few days of the sprint. We call this the just enough, just in time principle.
Why only the first few days? Why stop there?
Because the plan will change. You're going to learn new things. The development team inspects their progress every single day in the daily scrum. If they spend 4 hours detailing tasks for the final week, and then on day 3 they realize they need a completely different architectural approach,
All that planning was wasted.
all that planning was wasted. They rely on the daily scrum and constant collaboration to detail the rest of the work iteratively as they go.
So the how is not just about creating tasks, it's also about strategic agreements. What kind of strategic decisions are included here?
It includes the planning approach itself, which developers will work on which parts, any architectural considerations, especially if they're integrating a new technology, and the overall testing strategy they'll use to meet the definition of done. It provides the structure for the immediate future.
This entire output then rolls up into the sprint backlog. So let's clearly define the sprint backlog for our listener. It's so much more than just the list of tickets on a Trello board.
That's right. The sprint backlog is the comprehensive living artifact that comes out of sprint planning. And according to the 2020 guide, it has to contain 3 distinct and essential components.
Okay, what are they?
1, the sprint goal, that's the commitment, the why. 2, the set of selected PBIs that support that goal, that's the what. And 3, the plan for delivering them, the tasks and strategic agreements. That's the how.
So if you're listening and you look at your team's current backlog and it's just a long list of tickets without a clearly defined sprint goal or an articulated plan.
Your sprint backlog is incomplete,
Yeah.
and your team is operating without an anchor.
This is where we move from just the process mechanics into the true power of agility. We've established the sprint goal as this single objective, but we really need to give its role as a commitment the focus it deserves. Why is this formalized commitment so critical?
Because commitment creates transparency, and transparency allows for inspection and adaptation. The 2020 Scrum Guide truly solidified this concept with the introduction of what it calls the commitment triad.
The commitment triad.
And this is the key structural insight for you, the learner.
Let's slow down and really appreciate this. This is what gives Scrum its structural integrity, right? Tying every action back to a stated outcome.
Exactly. Before, the link between the artifacts, the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment and their purpose could feel a little abstract. The triad makes it explicit.
Okay, so break it down for us.
The product backlog commits to the long-term product goal. That's the overall destination. The sprint backlog commits to the short-term sprint goal. That's the next critical milestone. And the increment, the actual deliverable, commits to the definition of done. That's the quality standard.
That structure is phenomenal. It ties long-term vision, short-term focus, and quality all together. It prevents teams from endlessly fiddling with features that don't serve a larger purpose.
And the sprint goal, therefore, has to represent a coherent, measurable step toward that broader product goal. But its superpower, like we touched on, is the flexibility it provides. Let's explore that resilience under pressure.
Okay, let's use a hypothetical. Say we commit to a sprint goal. Our application must securely handle high-volume user registration over the weekend sale period.
Good goal.
The developers pull in 5 PBIs for that goal. Then, on day 2, they discover a critical external library they rely on for security patching has a major 0-day vulnerability. They have to spend a full day researching and implementing a workaround. Their velocity just tanked.
In a traditional fixed-scope environment, that team is already failing. They are now behind schedule on their fixed list of PBIs.
Right. Panic sets in.
But in Scrum, the team returns to the sprint goal. The question isn't, did we finish all the tickets? The question is, can we still achieve secure, high-volume registration?
And the answer is likely yes, but they have to cut scope to compensate for that lost day.
Precisely. They negotiate with the PO. Perhaps they realize PBI number 5, which focused on some enhanced analytics logging, is valuable but not essential to the goal of secure registration, so they cut it.
And they focus their remaining time exclusively on the core security work.
The sprint goal is achieved. The plan was flexible. The goal acts as a negotiation shield, ensuring the team works towards one shared outcome, rather than a disparate collection of tasks that fracture their cohesion.
Let's connect the goals again using that hierarchy example from the source material, because this link is where strategy really happens.
So if the overall vision, the product goal, is grand say, enable self-service onboarding for small business customers. That's a huge, probably year-long undertaking.
Yeah, you can't achieve that in one sprint or even 5. It has to be broken down into valuable slices.
So the sprint goal must be a contained, valuable slice of that vision. A strong, related sprint goal might be something like Customers can submit basic company details online and receive an automated confirmation email.
Okay, that's a fully testable, coherent step. It's not the whole system, but it delivers usable value and moves the needle toward the product goal.
The sprint goal provides the focus for the increment, and that increment, once it's integrated and tested against the definition of done, becomes that measurable step forward.
Now, let's consider the sprint goal's life during the sprint. It can't just be created and forgotten. We establish the commitment is made in planning, but how is it reinforced on a daily basis?
It has to be the focal point of the daily scrum. That event is not just a status report where people say, yesterday I worked on ticket 10, today I work on ticket 11.
That is the worst kind of daily scrum.
The focus must shift. The daily scrum inspects progress towards the sprint goal. It's about asking, did what I did yesterday move us closer to our goal? Are there any impediments preventing us from hitting the sprint goal? If the developers realize they're drifting, they use the daily scrum to inspect and adapt their plan immediately.
And this focus is what allows that negotiation with the product owner to happen naturally. If the team sees complexity emerging, they immediately flag the risk to the sprint goal.
And the conversation starts. PBI number 7 is going to take twice as long. We can still achieve the sprint goal, but we need to drop PBI number 5. Are you comfortable with that scope negotiation?
That proactive, goal-driven conversation is the essence of self-management and agility. It provides stability, the goal, while allowing flexibility with the PBIs.
Right.
We do have to touch on the nuclear option, the cancellation of the sprint. If the team is struggling to hit all the PBIs, that's a scope negotiation. When, and only when, can the sprint actually be canceled?
The product owner is the only person who can cancel the sprint, and they should only do so if the sprint goal becomes genuinely obsolete or invalid.
So not because the team is behind.
No, never. It's because the market or the objective itself has changed fundamentally.
Can you give us an example of a valid cancellation?
Sure. Imagine the sprint goal was integrate the new regulatory payment API before the June deadline. But 3 days into the sprint, a regulator changes the law, rendering that API completely illegal or obsolete.
Okay, that makes sense.
Continuing work on the old API would be a total waste of time, effort, and money. That is a legitimate reason to stop, cancel the sprint, and immediately hold a new sprint planning event with the new information.
So it's disruptive and should be very rare.
Very rare, but necessary if the commitment itself loses all organizational value.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Understanding the role of the sprint goal is half the battle. Writing an effective one is the skill that separates great Scrum teams from average ones. We need to give you, the learner, a clear, rigorous checklist to vet your own sprint goals.
Let's move beyond the abstract and get into some tangible characteristics. What does a high-impact sprint goal actually look like?
Well, first, the most obvious one that teams frequently violate. It has to be a single objective. It cannot be a list of mini goals. If you have 3 separate, equally important objectives, like fix critical bugs, implement new user feature, and refactor database, you have 3 different priorities.
Which means you have 0 priorities.
Exactly. The goal must have one singular focus. Second, and this is crucial for communicating value, it has to be outcome-oriented. It focuses on measurable value for the user or the business, not just activities or tasks the developers perform. We care about the result, not the effort.
Right. And third?
Third, connected.
Yeah.
It must link directly back to that overarching product goal or a clear stakeholder outcome. If you can't draw a line from the sprint goal to a strategic business objective, why are you even doing it? It provides the why.
Fourth, achievable. This ties back to the developer's forecast and their capacity analysis. It has to be realistic, given the team's bandwidth and the duration of the sprint.
Committing to a goal that requires 150% of your known capacity only leads to failure and demotivation.
And
finally, clear and testable. This is the acid test. At the end of the sprint, you must be able to say definitively, yes, we achieved X measurable outcome, or no, we did not. Goals that use vague language like improve or begin work on are just not testable.
Let's use the examples from the source material to really highlight the difference between output, the work done, and outcome, the value generated. Let's revisit that banking app domain.
Okay. The good goal is customers can view their last 30 transactions in the mobile app.
That is clear, it's user-centric, and it's totally testable. You can launch the app and see if the user has new visibility. Simple.
Now contrast that with the poor goal. Implement transaction history API, add tests, refactor login, fix notifications bug, and update documentation.
Ugh, that's just a task list masquerading as a goal. It has no coherence at all. If the team completes the API implementation but fails to refactor the login, how do we score the sprint?
It's impossible. And stakeholders don't know what single feature to look for. The team's focus is fractured, it's pulled in 5 different directions.
Okay, another one. The internal HR portal domain example.
The good goal is hiring managers can create and publish job posts without HR assistance.
That's phenomenal. That defines a massive operational gain-reducing dependence on HR staff and empowering managers. It's a true outcome.
Whereas the poor goal is simply complete sprint backlog items 101 through 110.
That's just purely output focused. It's meaningless to any stakeholder outside of the development team's internal tracking system. It makes the entire sprint feel like a bureaucratic exercise rather than a value-generating endeavor.
Exactly.
So if a team is struggling to draft a good, outcome-oriented goal, they need some structural help. What practical sentence patterns can they use to guide their thinking towards value?
Framing the goal using a known structure forces clarity. We have 3 highly effective patterns. First, enable a persona to do something so that there's a benefit.
The classic user-focused structure.
Yes. It forces you to define the user, the action, and the positive result. Second, validate whether a hypothesis by releasing a feature or experiment and measuring a metric. This one is fantastic for discovery or risk-heavy sprints, framing the work around learning, not just building. And the third, reduce a problem for a segment by an approach. This one focuses directly on addressing pain points and solving systemic issues.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you. Let's say my team has a poor laundry list goal. We need to fix the database query speed and update the checkout page styling. How do we use that first pattern, the enable do something benefit structure, to transform that into a coherent sprint goal?
That's a great real-world challenge. Okay, so the current goal is 2 tasks, database work and styling. Let's ask, why are we doing the database work? Let's assume the underlying problem is slow loading times during peak traffic. The styling is also valuable, but we have to choose one focus.
So we choose speed.
If we choose speed, we can reframe it. Enable high-volume power users to view their account dashboard in under 2 seconds so that user frustration leading to abandoned sessions is reduced by 15%.
Now, that is a mission. We've defined the persona, power users, the action, view the dashboard quickly, and the measurable benefit, reduced abandonment. The database query fix and the styling might both be PBIs within that plan.
But the goal is the outcome. Speed and retention. That is the power of drafting for clarity.
Let's look at that detailed example from the sources because it's so good. Enable UK customers to reset their password without calling support so that password-related calls drop by at least 20%.
That's the gold standard. It is explicit about the Persona UK customers. The outcome self-service reset, the business benefit support calls drop, and it is absolutely testable. We can check the metrics, it's clear, it's aligned with value, and it gives the team a mission they can rally behind. It provides internal focus and external transparency at the same time.
Okay, now we shift from drafting the commitment to actually executing the plan. We emphasized earlier that preparation is the secret weapon against wasted time in sprint planning. What does efficiency look like in the real world, day-to-day, before the event even begins?
Efficiency is achieved through continuous product backlog refinement. The product owner must constantly keep the backlog ordered and groomed. They should be working with the developers regularly, often several times a week, dedicating maybe about 10% of the team's capacity to ensure high-priority PBIs are small, clearly written, and technically understood.
So if the team spends the first 2 hours of sprint planning arguing about requirements or estimation, that's not a planning problem. That's a refinement failure.
100%. That preparation ensures that when sprint planning starts, the PBIs are ready, as the term goes.
Right.
Efficiency also means knowing your capacity information, upfront planned leave, holidays, maintenance time, all that must be known so the forecast is grounded in reality, not just optimism.
Let's focus on that capacity and forecasting component again. Scrum doesn't mandate specific estimation techniques like story points or hours, but how do effective teams translate their capacity into a realistic forecast?
They typically use past throughput velocity as a reference point only. Velocity tells you what you have delivered, which is useful historical data, but it is never, ever used as a stick or a target. The team then adjusts that reference for any known constraints.
So if the team's historical average is 40 points, but two key developers are out this week for training, they should probably forecast something like 25 to 30 points, leaving space for the inevitable uncertainty.
That's the responsible approach. The principle is to avoid overcommitment. If you plan to the absolute limit of your theoretical capacity, you're building a fragile plan. The first unexpected bug, complex integration issue, or knowledge gap will derail your entire sprint goal.
So a good forecast comfortably leaves a buffer.
A buffer for expected uncertainty and learning, yes.
This brings us to the biggest threats to focus and effectiveness, the anti-patterns. For you, the learner, these are the pitfalls that destroy agility and must be actively monitored. So let's start with the most foundational error. Anti-pattern number 1, no sprint goal.
This is catastrophic, and it's surprisingly common. Teams might just grab the top 15 tickets, label it the sprint plan, and start working. The team is now functioning as a feature factory. They're busy, but they lack focus.
What's the organizational cost of doing that?
The immediate cost is that lack of focus. Developers start working on the item they find easiest or most interesting, rather than the item that's most crucial to the agreed-upon value.
And long-term.
Over 6 months, the organizational cost is strategic drift. The product becomes a collection of random features built without purpose, creating technical debt and stakeholder confusion. And crucially, the daily scrums become useless status reports. I worked on ticket 5 instead of goal-driven inspection. Are we closer to achieving X measurable outcome?
The countermeasure has to be strict then. Make defining the sprint goal non-negotiable. If you cannot define the one thing you are trying to achieve, the meeting is not over.
Then there is anti-pattern 2, the laundry list goal. We saw this earlier. The goal is just complete PBIs 1 through 10, or a mashup of unrelated technical items.
The transparency failure here is so obvious. Stakeholders read that and learn nothing about the value you delivered.
It's worse than that. It creates internal conflict. If the goal is implement filters and derefactor login and fix 5 bugs, and the team runs out of time, which one fails? The PO wants the feature, the developers want the refactoring, the customer wants the bugs fixed. The team is split.
So the countermeasure is to always rewrite it as a true outcome.
Focus on the user behavior change. Instead of listing tasks, ask, what does the user gain?
Okay. Anti-pattern 3 addresses the authority imbalance, the PO dictating the plan.
This is a direct violation of the self-managing nature of the Scrum team. When the product owner ignores the developer's capacity and technical forecast and tells them exactly how many PBIs they must deliver, you get unrealistic plans, low morale, and developers who refuse to own the forecast.
It's just taking orders.
Exactly. And when the plan inevitably fails, who gets blamed? The developers, even though they were the ones who warned the PO about the overcommitment.
The solution is that clear division of responsibility we talked about.
Right. The PO sets the desired outcomes and priorities, the why and the input, but the developers create the forecast of what can be done, the what and the how. Authority and accountability must align. The Scrum Master has to protect the developers from external pressure here.
Anti-pattern 4 deals with the execution phase. Over-detailed planning, trying to design every task for the whole 2 weeks.
The impact is just long, draining meetings where the team feels their time is being wasted on a certainty that doesn't exist. It also creates a psychological trap, the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay.
Well, we spent 4 hours documenting these 150 tasks, so we have to stick to them, even when the market has shifted. They sacrifice agility for the illusion of control.
So the countermeasure is efficiency. Plan enough detail for the first few days and rely on the daily scrum to detail the rest iteratively. The sprint backlog should be a living plan, not a finished document.
And finally, anti-pattern 5, which undermines the entire strategic vision, no link to the product goal.
So the team is busy, they're delivering increments, but they aren't actually contributing to the long-term vision.
Correct. The product becomes a collection of random features. This is often the result of stakeholders or managers panicking about small issues and forcing those tasks to the top of the backlog, overriding the strategic ordering. The team might be delivering 50 story points a sprint, but they are building the wrong thing faster.
And the countermeasure.
It's a fundamental transparency. The product goal has to be visible, and every single sprint goal must explicitly be checked against it during planning. If the sprint goal doesn't move you forward toward the product goal, you must ruthlessly prioritize.
This entire framework then, from the time box to the 3 questions, is built to ensure that sprint planning isn't just an administrative chore, but a deeply focused, value-defining strategic launch that protects the team and aligns the organization.
That's the goal.
So let's bring this all together for you, the learner. We've established that sprint planning is not just a meeting, It is a collaborative forecasting event created by the entire Scrum team and constrained by time to enforce focus.
And the single most important component, the element that defines value and provides scope flexibility, is the sprint goal. Remember the commitment triad. The sprint backlog commits to the sprint goal. By defining a single testable outcome rather than committing to a fixed, rigid list of tasks, the team gains the necessary shield to adapt to complexity, whether it's bugs, unexpected technical debt, or a challenging integration, while maintaining a laser focus on the promised value delivery.
The sprint goal is that essential anchor that prevents the team from drifting into the anti-patterns of feature factories or task completion lists. It protects them from external noise and internal distractions, provided the team commits to inspecting their progress toward it daily in the daily scrum.
And this brings us back to our final provocative thought for you to mull over as you apply this knowledge in your own organization. We've established that the sprint goal is a commitment, a shield against random scope changes driven by technical difficulty. But the ultimate challenge is often organizational, not technical.
What happens when that commitment is challenged not by unexpected code complexity, but by internal politics? How does a self-managing team committed to one single sprint goal protect the integrity of the one thing they promised to deliver when the scope demands increase daily?
And often coming from leaders who weren't even in the planning meeting, simply because they need this one thing done now.
Exactly.
The true test of an agile organization is not merely writing a good sprint goal, it's the cultural fortitude to protect that goal once the commitment has been made. That ability to hold the line, to say no to distraction in service of the defined value, is the ultimate measure of self-management and organizational agility.
Something vital to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the strategic launch of the sprint. We hope this has given you a clearer, more focused view of how to drive tangible value in your next sprint.